Welcome everyone for our SUG Coimbatore group. So we are thrilled to have all of you here today as we gather to collaborate and share knowledge on things of Sitecore. Uh, we about us is myself, Prabhu Ranganathan. I'm working as a Sitecore architect, and uh, and my co-organizers is Gautam and Vignesh Jyotikumar, who are all working as a Sitecore lead and senior Sitecore specialist. So we have, I think the main purpose of this group is more than just gathering of professionals. It's a community built on the foundation of collaboration and knowledge sharing. So our primary goal is to provide a platform where Sitecore enthusiasts can come together to exchange ideas, insights, and best practices. That's our main aim to have created this group. And today's topic is it's about successful content migration planning. In this session, we are talking about some best practices, recommended practices for the content migration from one version to another version um, to get the successful content migration. And our presenter is Kelly Rusk, who is enterprise architect and Sitecore SMB and Sitecore MVP. So we are really happy to have him in this session and 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 and, I think I'd like to take over to Kelly Rusk. I think Kelly Rusk, you can go ahead and get started, please.
Yeah, thank you all so much for having me. And depending on how boring my topic is, you may not like me at the end. But in seriousness, I appreciate you all taking this time. And today we are going to run through really a content migration plan step by step. So this is going to be a little dry at times. We're going to talk about some key topics, but the goal is to really get you acclimated across a few different areas. So those areas are really what is content migration? What's our definition of content migration? What kind of content migration tools should we select? How do we get our site structure extracted and do a content audit? And then how do we do that kind of dangerous or difficult site structure and content mapping? Then we'll talk about our redirects and batch strategy for migration. And finally, text execution and some tips for success before we open up the floor for questions. And with that, we'll jump right in, really what is content migration and what about content synchronization? There's really two different things here going on. And when we think about content migration itself, we're really talking about moving content from one environment to another that has a differing content type. Because when it's different, you need to do things such as change your schema or decide if you're going to carry that content over. So that's really different from the content synchronization situation. And I'll talk about that momentarily. So content migration, a good example, you might have, a set of 8.2 environments, or you might have 8.2 to go into 10.2. But things are different. Maybe in 8.2 you have content types that don't have fields that you have in 10.2. Maybe you have new content types that exist in 10.2 don't exist in 8. So there's a lot of dynamics here. Like usually you see content migrations happen when you do a big platform upgrade and version upgrade, because that's when you're re-architecting your platform, maybe considering your design patterns that could have an implication on your actual content, right? Separately, you could have environments of the same version of Sitecore, but they have a different architecture. Again, this might be a situation where, irrespective of upgrading Sitecore, you said, hey, you know what? We're changing our whole website, our whole look and feel. Well, in that case, we might add some blogs, and those blogs are going to have a different template, aka content type, when I say template. And we need to accommodate for the differences there. And because they're different, as good as AI is, and he's in nature, we need to be able to map that content and say, okay, if it's A over here and becomes B in the new system, we need to figure out how to make A become B. And that's different from content synchronization. Content synchronization is where things match. So a good example is if you're using Psych or Sidekick or Razzle, the data types are the same. So you're probably just need to synchronize content. So if things are equal in your environments, let's say 8.2 to 10.2 everything's the same as far as data templates, at that point, you could probably do a content synchronization where you're going to run a tool like Sitecore Psychic's one of my favorites because everything's the same. I can say, okay, I'm moving that over here because the scheme is the same. But if there's a deviation in that, maybe there's a couple new fields that are a little different, you may want to look at content migration because that metadata makes a difference. So that's the main difference in content migration versus content synchronization. It'd be a very short presentation. We're just talking about content synchronization and say, hey, log in Sidekick, select your source, port to target. In this situation, we're going to talk about content migration for today. Any questions about the differences between the kind of content migration versus content synchronization? Hearing none, we'll jump into, now that we know what we're considering content migration, we're going to talk about some of the tools out there, getting the right tool for the job. So when we talk about tools, we kind of have some key requirements. And my requirements are really, can I export content items with the corresponding metadata for analysis outside of the migration tool? So I'd really like to pull them out, give them to my business partners, say, hey, do you really need all these fields? Generally, you only need 3 fields plus a couple more, right? I need to be able to then import these files once I've manipulated them to have the desired content and schema. And, those are really the 3 things I'm looking for. So I want to be able to export the content outside of the system, generate import files so I can have my business units maybe fill in new data into a CSV file, and I need to be able to import that back in. And the nice to haves, I love to be able to view the source and destination content tree via GUI interface, and maybe have some customization of the tool so I can execute a migration, maybe getting custom, maybe do automation, but having that flexibility really helps. So when you look at that, there's some cool tools we've probably come across. Razzle being one of them. Sitecore Sidekick I mentioned a lot. Unicorn Sync has some aspects to it. PowerShell extensions allows us to do some export and import items. Sitecore Data Importer that kind of builds SPE, and the Sitecore Content Export tool. And when we look at this, the Sitecore Content Export tool is one of my favorites. I feel like it gives us the most flexibility. Some of these other tools like Razzle and Sidekick are really there for content synchronization. And just so you know, post this call, I'm going to be, sending the slide deck over as a PDF so you'll have it available. Oh, good question. No, we're covering even down to 8.2. So good question about, are we only covering 10.1 and upwards? Nope. Just did a migration from 8.2 to 10.2 using the content export tool. So it uses a lot of the same DLLs. Really, it connects to the Sitecore Services API, and that's where a lot of these things integrate to get the data for your items. So a lot of the stuff you can do with the content export tool, you do with Sitecore PowerShell extensions as well. But again, huge fan of using Sitecore Sidekick. So coming down, once we have those tools in place, we're gonna, for the purpose of today, we're just gonna talk about the Sitecore Content Export tool, acknowledging that you could even write your own tool off the Sitecore API. It just has a nice interface and something that I've used across some projects. So I would say consider that. So once we kind of figured out our tools, we want to talk about, well, what's the first step? First step is really understand our taxonomy. So we want to understand what we have before we migrate. And that's where we get into, okay, but beyond the content itself, where does it live in the content tree? And we want to capture and really understand the hierarchy that we have in place, because you might want to say, listen, as part of this migration, we don't need a bunch of the stuff we have before, or we can merge a bunch of these content types. So there's an expression, junk in, junk out. We don't want to take a bunch of junk, things we don't want, into the new environment. So extracting the site structure helps us understand, really, do we want to maintain the structure? Our content types live inside of this taxonomy, this hierarchy. So are they being used in the right places? Can we better centralize some of this? Can we better break them up into maybe some base content types? When I say base content types equals data templates. Can we break those out into a base where we can maybe have distinct ones, or do we need less of them? So this is kind of your less or more, or you start happening here, and you start looking at the hierarchy and getting excited about, well, wow, there's a lot of opportunities here. And once you have that extracted, the next thing you want to say, okay, I've extracted my site hierarchy into a CSV file, so I can see what relates to what. Now I want to do a content audit. And the content audit really is exporting all your data templates, aka content types, from your source environment, and really looking at them and saying, okay, based on all of these items that I have, do I understand the metadata? Do they share metadata? Maybe they can have a base template they can inherit from. Is there new content that I need to have in place? But at the core of it, you want to really understand what's the relationships between all these content types. You want to, one, get a list of all your data templates, just export each and every single one of them with all their fields. Fields equals metadata. And understand what's the relationship. And do I care about some of these content types in my new environment? And that's going to be part of, and this is the Sitecore content export tool. This is me exporting this data. And this is going to be part of your kind of your high level content model. Because once you have all your individual content types listed and exported, you want to create a content model. And this is, I've got a blog post at this as well, where you list out the content type name, the type of content it is, its location. Is it Sitecore? Is it external? Is it not created yet? You can make this even in the Sitecore content tree. Where is it located? Is it structured? Notice these documents, CT5 over here, it's not structured. It needs metadata. It needs a data template attached to it. Are there related content types? Maybe this page is related to a component. And is it in scope for migration? So this really gives you a sense of, okay, I've exported all my data templates. I've listed them out, including the type of content they are, because we care about the type. I've said what they're related to, and then I have a keep kill list, because when you go in front of your business stakeholders and ask them, do you really need this? They might say no. For example, I've worked in records management for so many years. I really need a hobby outside of work, apparently. But I'll go into organizations and they'll say, hey, you've got all this content here. How long do you keep it? And they say, we keep everything forever. I'm sure you all have heard that from businesses, right? We keep everything forever. And then I say, okay, how long is forever? 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Oh, no, more, not more than a week. So if you get them to define what they actually need the content for, it's really going to get you to a better place. So I see a question here about content migration not required in the case of upgrading from version 9 to 10. Well, that depends. It depends. During that upgrade, are you changing your data types? If not, you can just do an in-place upgrade and do a Sitecore synchronization. The only times you're going to run that content migration is when you really need to adjust your data. It's different. And that's where you start comparing and saying, okay, we've done a high-level content model. We've done a content audit. In the new environment, things are different where we don't need some of these things or they change. That's the time you do a content migration. It's all about changing that. It's all about the metadata in the end. So let's talk about that kind of structural differences. So when we talk about your site structure and content mapping, it's really kind of the path from before to after. And this is your key, right? If your content audit, you discover that nothing's changing, do a synchronization. Nothing changes in your schema. If it is changing, though, you need to have a plan. And that plan really starts with doing a site structure mapping. You want to compare what you had in your source to what you're going to create in destination. And this might be a situation where instead of just doing a one-to-one, where you're saying, okay, let's just copy over our site structure, evaluate it. Take a chance to look at ECM best practices and look for governance and say, okay, maybe we need a better structure in place. Maybe things need to live inside of different tenants for commercial sites or corporate sites, or whatever you have if you have a multi-site scenario. Or maybe we need to structure it differently for security purposes and block off different sections. So what you want to make sure is that at the end of the day, you know what you have so that when you create your new structure, you're not missing any sections. Like you just don't say, oh my gosh, we forgot about the libraries. We need to migrate those over. So your site structure mapping is literally taking the CSV you exported from your source environment, making one in another CSV and comparing the two and saying, okay, are they the same or are they different? And if they're different based on what I extracted from my original environment, why are they different? And do I want to carry those over? And that's again at the site structure level, that's your taxonomy. And then you're asking the question, okay, now with the new content that I have, I want to determine where that's going to live and where that's going to be. So once you have your content model in place from your content audit, you really want to focus on mapping the content from the source environment to the destination environment, including any kind of transformations. Again, transformations are why you need a content migration. So you're going to start listing maybe all your pages and where you have them maybe Sitecore 8.2, what are they called in Sitecore 10.2, and are there any differences? Are there any field differences? And it's important to note that some of your environments might be different. So you might have some things that are components in your source environment, but now they're pages, or vice versa. So depending on how you're structuring your data, including your taxonomy, you might need to change your content types. And the nice part is when you extract your site structure and extract your content, and you have all the content that you want, and that CSV literally values all the way down of what you want. And I'm going to share what that looks like in a few minutes. Um, you can say, listen, I have the values that I want. For example, I have a field called, Kelly's favorite selector, and it's got all my drop-down values repeated 120 times for the 120 items I have. But you know what? In Sitecore 10.2, that field name changes and it's not a drop-down anymore. It's a text field. So you'll have a new import spreadsheet, and you can copy the values into the import spreadsheet and then import into your new environment, and that helps you migrate. And that's a critical aspect here when we talk about that migration. We're really talking about creating these new import files. So the import files you're going to create in your destination system, and you're literally going to say, okay, I'm going to look up my new data template I created and its metadata. I'm going to create an import file, and it's going to give me this cool CSV file that's going to allow me to literally come in here and just copy and paste in the values I want from my Sitecore maybe 8 environment. So the fields may be different, but the values could be the same. So I can copy those over, and we want to match the content type. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. So I'm going to show an example of that. I'm going to share a different screen now. So I love animals. And let's say, SeaWorld is an example here. Maybe this is my new environment. And my new data template here for blogs is going to have browser titles. It's going to have listing images. It's going to have a main content for what I want. It might have meta descriptions for what we need, meta keywords, might have a navigation title, all these things. So all these values I copied in from those CSVs I exported from Sitecore 8. And I just put them into the right location. I created additional things, like I created different navigation titles for it. And so I copied this in and worked with my business to say, hey, what are the navigation titles for this? And then when I have this all together, this is my schema, right? This is my metadata, and this is the content I have. So I'm doing content migration here because I have more than a few items. And I want to make sure that I don't end up in a situation where I've got to manually create these again and again and again. So basically, I'm just copying and pasting what I want in here or typing it out all the way down. And now I have an import spreadsheet that'll load right into Sitecore, and it creates all the items for me in bulk. So that's the value of using a tool. But the difference here is that this blog data template that I have, it's different than the blog data template that I had in Sitecore 8. So I needed to create a new data template and needed to put in that content. Questions about what we have in front of us? Can you all see the CSV file? So team, could you see the CSV file I was speaking to? It's okay to unmute if you want to. Or chat in. Can you see the CSV file in front of us? Okay, great. Thank you. So everyone understands kind of like, this is my import file that I created. The import file just gives me the metadata, and then I filled in the values and then imported it. So that is the main value and kind of what this looks like before you put it back into the system. And with that, once you have it in the system and you start creating these files, you can start looking through and saying, okay, now that I've transformed that data and I've got my import spreadsheets, I can start considering how I batch it in. So when we start batching it in, we're really talking about what do we do here? And before you even talk about your batches, you might have a lot of content that you have redirects on. I've got a little handy article here that talks about redirect governance. So I encourage you to check that out. And it talks about really a keep kill list and saying, hey, do I really care about some of these redirects? Am I managing the right location? Maybe I need to move my redirects up into Cloudflare to point my content to the right location because I don't want to lose my SEO juice, right? And if I'm changing a bunch of content types, I could potentially lose some. So I might want to do some redirects to say, hey, you used to be able to find this cool thing at Sitecore user group, the Sitecore user group page. It now belongs at Sitecore Symposium page. So we want to make sure we do a 301 to redirect everyone who clicked on that link in Google to the right location or bookmarks. So redirects are a very important part of your content migration strategy as well. What we care about in the core bread and butter is the batch strategy. So I've got all these spreadsheets now, right? So I've gone from the beginning, I've exported my site structure. I've done a content audit. I've determined that my content's different. I've created new DEDI templates, and I've mapped from Sitecore 8 to Sitecore 10 maybe, or any environment, my old environment to a new environment, how the content's different. I've copied or created the values inside of my new data templates that I have for spreadsheets. Now I need to import all those spreadsheets, right? That's a big task. You could have 300 different spreadsheets or multiple batches that are different page type or different content types that you want to migrate in. For example, you could have different, if you're using cards and containers, you could say, okay, here are all my container types, or here's my animal page, here's my blog page. These are all different types of content. So you really have a strong batch strategy. And a few rules I really like to have is batches just take longer than eight hours to migrate. A unit should be easily identifiable. Maybe I'm migrating a site section or a subsite at a time, so I can really test it and see the site come together. Or maybe I'm like migrating all my blogs as an example. Batches should be tested for each content type is validated as successful and viewable in the content tree. So I was harping about site structure and that taxonomy. We care about that content tree. So we want to make sure that everything lives in the right place when you migrate in. And you want to really, I kind of like the batch per subsite due to the amount of interrelated content and templates required to render a page. So my goal at the end of a batch is that I can see a full page rendered out within the Sitecore CMS. And when I look at that, before I finally migrate, I'm doing a few things. I'm doing a content migration test, number one. So the goal of my content migration test is to validate the content migration tools, meeting the criteria, validate that the content migration process is governable, including testing, because if it's taking 2 weeks to migrate content, and you're not testing, maybe something's wrong in your strategy. I want to know if the batch strategy is working or needs to be changed. Like, do I need to maybe break the content I want to import into more batches, or perhaps change what I'm targeting to batch into? Maybe instead of a whole site section, maybe hit a section of a site instead of a whole subsite. A good example is maybe I just want to import blogs instead of a whole subsite, and really measure the time it takes to complete a batch. You might say, oh, wow, that went faster. That was only 2 hours to import everything. Great. We can now do 3 batches a day and have time to even get lunch. So this is, it can be a heavy process here. So content migration testing is so critical for that aspect. And then you start breaking stuff into your batches and identifying, okay, here's my little spreadsheet. What's the content type name? When am I going to execute? Item depth is, maybe I have 100 items or 1,000 items. So how many items am I migrating per each of these content types? And and then check off, is it executed? Is it validated? Any notes or takes away? And another value of doing batches is you might learn something during your migration that informs or changes your future batches. So it's really important to look at the depth. It doesn't even include all the data. Maybe you're doing 10 to 15 items per content type, but you're really just ensuring that you batch this out so that at the end of each batch, you have some identifiable aspect. And the reason we do this, number one reason we do this is that you don't end up in a situation where you migrate everything and find out that the migration was wrong or went to the wrong location. So we want to catch those issues early. We want to validate a section at a time to make it easier from testing too. It's far better to migrate and test in small batches and iterations than do a giant migration in the middle of the night and land it on all your content off and say, okay, tell if it's wrong. And we're launching in 24 hours, right? Content migration normally gets left at the very end of a project, and that's when you get into trouble. So with this, as we're doing these executions, here's a good example of my different content types. When I'm executing, I might take notes that this content type 2 includes new content that hasn't been existing before in our environment. Make sure to do a batch number and really identify the batch number. Like this is just batch 1. Everything that I'm migrating in batch 1, it has content 1, 2, and 4 as an example. And this is where I'm at in the process of that batch being successful. So, and naming the batch matters. And you can split your batches across your users. You can empower your content office to be part of the migration process so they can have more content intimacy. But at the end of the day, it's really ensuring that you have done that strong content audit. Everybody understands your content types. And when you migrate in, that it makes sense at the end of the day. If it doesn't, you may have missed something in your content audit. So those are very critical factors to consider. So as we talk about that, once you have all your content migrated in and tested again, maybe we did 30 batches where we did a batch a day, everyone's tested, everything looks good, do a final validation. Walk through the website as a user, go through user journeys, and make sure you aren't missing any content. And the content that is showing is the content that you wanted. And that includes the site structure, that it's in the right place. And this is rigorous. This is a lot of work. But again, as we get to these steps, we're talking about what do I have today? What do I want tomorrow? If that data structure is different at all, let's make sure to export what we have, map it into the new schema, and import it properly. That's really what we're talking about here in this process. And with that, there's a few tips we want to jump into here. And it really is the whole mantra is do it right or don't migrate at all. And a few things to do is really, start early in your project. Don't wait to the very end to begin your content migration. Migrate as you're going. Yeah, I would say that don't start doing development before you have all your content audit done. I would start migration at the beginning, your content audit. That content audit is going to inform your data structures, and those data structures are critical. So make sure to, put your content types, everything together. Gather a team that includes your content editors. Don't leave them out in the wild. Have your Sitecore admin there. Don't forget about the unstructured content, like links to documents. You might want to add some metadata to it to make it more searchable, right? Don't feel stuck in your content tree. All because what you have today has been around doesn't mean you have to keep that going. You can change your structure. You just want to care about what you used to have to make sure you don't miss anything. So consider maybe you're going headless and you want to reorganize how your content structured. Do that. Don't be afraid to do that. And please consider just, am I missing any content? Do I have what I need? And when we talk about your data templates, look for correlations. You might not have the proper base templates, and you might want to remove or create new ones. You might have 800 content types. I've seen that when really you just needed one base template. They're all the same. You just name it differently. And if the metadata is the same, and this is a good rule to follow, if your metadata is the same across content types or closely the same, maybe you don't need separate data templates. Maybe you need a single data template with a drop-down field to say the page type. So that's what we're looking at here. A few other tips. You want to really determine and maintain a regular cycle or upgrade cycle because you're not upgrading and keeping up to date. Your content gets stale. You're not considering or reviewing your content, and you really incur a lot of technical debt. And that makes future migrations more painful. And we want to get to is a point where you're not changing your data structures all the time. And you can just do a content synchronization using Sidekick across environments. Because that's really the golden goal, right? We want to say, okay, what I had today, I'm finally happy in my content structure. Every 6 months, we upgrade a Sitecore version and we reevaluate our actual content. We might find that 90% of that can carry over and maybe 10% is new. And that's okay. That allows you to keep on top of it. Test your content migration tools. Don't assume they're going to work for your need. Look for timeouts. Look for what's going to give you the best information. And that whole content mapping transformation process. When we talk about mapping what you have today versus where it should live tomorrow, that's really tedious. So make it fun. Maybe you make a content migration escape room where you split into teams and whoever gets it done first gets out and gets a prize once they map a section. And having said that, don't underestimate the level of content migration, but don't overestimate it either. If you follow the process that we've outlined here, where you identify what you have today, ask hard questions if you need this tomorrow, including the fields and the number of content types, you're going to get to a better place. But I encourage you, do not take shortcuts. It's better to slow down to go faster here because you can induce a lot of technical debt if you work around things. Normally, I see this happen where everyone just copies in the same content types that they had previously instead of taking the time to evaluate, do we still need this? Are these fields still valuable? Or can we merge these content types together? So all these tips are really aimed at ensuring you have a smoother path, that you consider what you have today with a very keen eye, and in the migration process, use the right tool to get the right content into the right place. So with that, I know I threw just a lot at you right now. Let's talk here. So please open up additional questions. You can go on mute. I love to converse, as you can probably hear. So I'd love to hear from you and hear about your challenges, hear about your content migration experiences, and ask the question. The one question I have for you all is there one thing from today's presentation that helped you? And if so, did something help you here? And if not, what can I do to help you? So did anything help you here? Any new questions arise, kind of walking through the process of content audits, site structure audits, and mapping to a new structure? Has anyone gone through the pain of a content migration like this and would like to share their pain?
I think so. So people, does anyone have any questions? Please do put it on the chat.
Oh, great. Yeah, so how does this content migration take care of publishing activity? It depends. No, this supports migration to XM or XP. It doesn't matter. This is all at the CMS layer. So you'll be able to migrate into your core, what you're migrating here is all about the CMS. That's always going to be core, whether they're headless or not. When you import, you can choose an option, the content export tool, to automatically publish. I recommend waiting and just publishing once you see your content in the content tree. So the steps I do is I run that content import of my particular batch or content type I'm migrating. And with that import, I look in the content tree to make sure everything looks good. and then I'll publish after the web database, or let the headless aspects pick up on it. But this is all about the core where you're managing your content. So irrespective of headless, XM or XP, this is the same process you would follow. Good question, though. And apologies if I put you all to sleep. This is a heavy topic. It's kind of a necessary evil to talk about content migration. Additional questions or comments or concerns? And I'll ask a question to you all. Has anybody else gone through a content migration like this or a similar process?
No.
Okay. Do some of the tips that we have here help?
Yeah, it's helped. It's kind of a recommended practice kind of approach for us to work on the content. Try to follow that.
I'm sorry, I can barely hear you. Are you able to speak up?
So, can you hear me? No?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Yeah, the thing is, it's kind of a recommended approach. So,
Yes.
we'll try to follow this.
Good. Yeah, the goal is I'm trying to save you all some pain, because content migrations, because you have to really evaluate things, you can't just automate it. It won't know where you want to put things or what you want to change. You're going to be engaging your business stakeholders a bit, those that own the content. So hopefully this saves you some pain and helps you in the process. And you know, I would say with this as well, I've got a blog post that walks through this too. And you know, really just a lot of this is common sense. There's some common pain here, but I'm hoping that it helps you in your next endeavor.
Thanks a lot, Lee. So I had an opportunity to work with Kelly on the content migrations. So he has a good knowledge, and thanks for the session, Kelly. It was really helpful. I just want to, share your experience with everyone. That's why we offering for this particular content.
Thank you.
It was really helpful.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me in, and you know, I value our friendship as well. It's good to hear your voice.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for, accepting it.
Anytime.
Yeah.
You know, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm active. So if any of you have questions about content migration, governance, or get stuck, please reach out to me. I'm here to be a resource. And as I said in the beginning part of the call, we're a community. I'm just honored and appreciate the opportunity to share some of my learnings, and it may not be all right. You know, there's things I'm still learning about, but I'm hoping that together we can all learn and become easier in our Sitecore journeys.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Kelly.
No worries. I'm going to zip this up into a PDF, and I'll send it over.
Sure, that would help.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, everyone. So we'll post
yeah.
once when the recording is ready. We'll post on our YouTube channel, and please do follow up our LinkedIn profile for upcoming sessions. Happy weekend.
Happy weekend, everyone. Take care.
Yeah. Thanks all. Take care. Bye.
Thanks all for
Bye.
joining. Happy weekend.
Bye.